2 and 1. So midpoint of a line segment. So how do we find what the midpoint actually is? Kind of the point in the middle between a line segment. So imagine that you have this number line here. It would be pretty simple for you to deduce. Let's say if I had a line, say going from here to here. All right, I'm going to draw this line out. Okay, so connect these. And this particular line lies between 1 and 10. And you can find what the middle point is. Okay, so how would we do that? Well, we can kind of think, all right, well, from 10, to 1, so that's basically 9 spots. So somewhere in the middle, so 9 divided by 2, okay, is 4.5. All right, so now our starting point is 1. So that would mean if I move 4.5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, and then I want to move a half there. So let me just kind of move a half in here. Okay, so right there, you can see, and basically you have found the midpoint. All right, so here is 1, and then here is the other. So that's not terrible to do, right? You can kind of find the difference between the two, so the highest and then the lowest, divided by 2, and then just add it from the beginning. Now there is a little bit easier way to do it all in one step, so you don't have to do any counting. Okay, so and the way that we do that is we would say, all right, so here is my starting point, a 1, here is my ending point, a 10. And what we would rather do, okay, instead of finding basically the range in between there, what we take a look at is we simply say, all right, so I'm going to take kind of like taking an average between 2 points. So here is point number 1, 10, and then point number 2. Now, if you take an average, right, in this case, between 2 points, well, the average is divided by 2. And notice that you're going to get 11 divided by 2, which is 5.5, which is exactly where that point lies, right? It lies at 5.5. So it's kind of your average in between those two particular points. And that's probably the easiest way to find what the midpoint is. Now, this is all great because this is just a flat line. Now, does this also work, okay, if we were still a flat line, but maybe the numbers were negative in some way? All right, so what if we had negative numbers instead? So let me do that, and then I'll fast forward as I'm creating this line, making it negative. Okay, so hold on. All right, so now I have my line. So notice it looks kind of the same. The only thing that I have done is I've basically changed the number line. Notice my 0 now is kind of somewhere within here. All right, so that's my 0 point right there, instead of being all the way on the left-hand side as it was above. And now my line basically spans from -7 all the way up to 2. So, sure, again, we can find the midpoint. Notice that it's going to be identical because I've aligned the actual lines together. Now, what I mean by aligning them, I am meaning this, that, so this particular line, so notice it just goes, it's exactly the same as it is right here. So we would figure that our midpoint is going to be exactly the same. So it should be here, which, as you can see, is basically -2.5. So it's between -2 and -3, so halfway, so it's -2.5. So that's just by deducing it and visually being able to see it. But, does the averages still work? Okay, so for instance, if I wanted to take, the smallest number, add it to the largest number, so we have -7 plus 2, and then I'm going to divide by 2 because I'm taking the average, do I still get the same thing? So in this case, I'm going to take -7, so -7 plus, okay, this, which is 2, and then divide by 2, so what do I get? Well, in this case, I'm going to get -7 plus 2, which is -5, divided by 2, And indeed, it gives me negative 2.5, which is exactly what I wanted. So I wanted to show you this because this is something that you have to know and be comfortable with, of finding a midpoint when, for instance, the line is flat. And it doesn't matter if, your axes, and this could be your x-axis, for instance, is negative, or if it's positive, if both of the actual points lie on the negative, or one lies on the positive like it is here, and then one lies on the negative. So that's kind of one of the easier ways to do it. Now, the other way, as I mentioned, is you can just simply take the difference between the two and then just add it. So in this case, notice the difference is the larger one is 2 minus the smaller one, which is negative 7. Okay, so this is what we have here. So negative 7, so this is 2 minus, all right, and this is going to be negative 7, so it's going to be 9, and then 9 divided by 2, which is 4.5, which is exactly what we had here. So we would move, 4.5 spots over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a half. And we get to exactly the same midpoint. Now, does this also work if they were vertical lines? So if you had a line which was going like this, in this direction, and you basically flipped everything up and you wanted to find a midpoint between two particular points, can you still find the average? The answer is, of course, yes. You can, because all you're doing is you're just shifting your flat line, making it vertical, and then you can find your actual midpoint. So the idea is, you take your higher point, or you take your 2 points, and let's say we can take your higher point plus your lower point, and then you divide by 2, because all you're doing is really just finding an average, the mean between the 2 points, and then that's going to be your midpoint. So that's all that you have. Now, where does this lead to? Well, it leads to, now, what if you have these line segments and they're not necessarily flat, or they're not necessarily vertical, because those ones are the easiest ones to do. But what if they're like this, right? Where they're kind of lines and they're arbitrarily moving along. So I have a Cartesian plane here, or an X and Y axes. And now what do? Right? So how do I find the midpoint? You would figure that it would be something very similar. So I'm going to first concentrate on this one here. So I'm going to blow it up so that you can see it. And the way that you do it is, if it's not a flat line, or if it's not a vertical line, keep in mind that any line in the X and Y axes, you can really create a triangle out of it. Now, what do I mean by a triangle? Well, what I mean is that you can take, the actual line, and notice that you can create a triangle. So going across here and then going up this way. And this particular triangle is, at a right angle. So it has a right angle attached to it. And now you can find out, so this is your X. Okay, so let's say that would be your X value right in this direction. And then this would be your Y value in that direction. And it's kind of your rise over run, if you think about slopes or something of that nature. So in order to find the midpoint, well, what you're going to do is you can take a line segment. You're going to make a triangle out of it. And now notice what you have is you basically have 2 lines. One is a flat line in this direction, which you can find the midpoint of. All right, so you know those values. So notice that those particular values that we have there, so that's your X, so this is your 1, that's 1. That's 5.5, so that's 5.5 here. So if you want to find what the midpoint of that is, well, we just did that. All you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, so I want to know what the average between the two is. So this is what it is. So that's going to be 6.5 divided by 2. All right. And now you can go ahead and find what that is. So this is 6.5 divided by 2. So it's going to be 3.25. Now, if it's a fraction, you do the same thing. If it's a whole number, you do the same thing. It doesn't really matter. So what does this mean? What it means is, so notice this is 2, this is 3. okay, and your midpoint is going to be, okay, so right here, so that's 3.25 because this is 3.5, this is 4. So your midpoint is right there. And it just carries on, okay, so basically up to this particular point on the line. So that's going to be your midpoint in that direction. And now you do exactly the same thing with the y. So notice that in the y, well, we know if I take this, okay, and I go now in this direction and I go upwards, well, we know those values as well. We know the y values. So our y value, so it's 3.5, and then this one is 1.5. So all I'm going to do is, again, I'll take the mid, okay, find the average between the two, divided by 2. So in this particular way, so 3.5 plus 1.5, so it's going to be 5, and it's going to be 2.5. So now 2.5 is right here, and notice that's exactly, okay, the line's right there. All right, so that's your 2.5 right there. So your midpoint for this, so your x value was, so 3.25, and your y value is 2.5. And you found your midpoint of a line segment that's not necessarily flat. So you're just dividing it into two things. And that's what you can do, and it's actually how you approach these types of questions. Now, once you do this, okay, it's kind of nice and easy because, you know, you can add and divide by 2. It's not a very difficult thing to do, but you should also see it visually that it indeed actually divides and splits the lines in a half. All right, that's the midpoint. Now, I wanted to show you here this one. You know, what happens if, you know, one of them is negative. As we saw above when I was doing it in a flat line, it doesn't matter if it's negative or positive. So now in here, you can choose. So again, you can make yourself a triangle. Now, it doesn't matter what triangle you choose. You know, you can go in this direction. Okay, so like this, and then you can bring this down. So that's obviously one triangle in that direction. Or, you know, if it's more convenient for you, you can do it this and then cut across here. So you can choose whichever triangle you want. So I'll do the one at the bottom there, for instance. And in this case, I'm going to start. So let's say I want to find the midpoint between these. Well, what's the midpoint? This is the y direction. So my y direction is 6.5. Let me go back here. So this is 6.5, which is your y. And then this is your 2. So this is plus 2 divided by 2. So that's 8.5 divided by 2. And 8.5 divided by 2 is 4.25. So what happens? Well, what happens is you're going to go, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Now 4.5 is going to be somewhere here. So you're basically, okay, so notice you're nicely sticking this in and you found the midpoint. That's your y. And you're going to do the same thing with your x. So as you go across in here, so now you can find, you know, the midpoint there. Now obviously you can already see, you know, that it's going to be exactly this point. All right, so this is going to be the point. Now what is that point? Well, that point, you know, you can take and simply take your x values, add them together. Now I know that they're negative, it doesn't matter. You're just finding the average between the two. So you have, so this is going to be negative 6.5 divided by 2, which indeed is going to be 3. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, okay, 0.25. So my midpoint for this particular line segment is that. And there you have it. So that's how you find midpoints in a relatively simple way. All right, so that's one of the ways, just simply in taking an average. You could do it by taking the difference between the two and then adding it as I did above here, if you like. I hope that this makes sense to you and that you can do some of these on your own. Okay, thanks for watching. See you in a future video.